I would hide the cowboy hat because on Beach Boulevard in the bus, you don't really want to be wearing the cowboy hat looking. You're already wearing faux Western clothes. It's a bad look. Welcome to the Lighter Darker podcast, where we talk about the creative process of filmmaking and the art of visual storytelling. Today is a special 2024 year-end bonus episode, so hope you're having a great holiday. We plan today to get to a few more questions from the mailbag. It was overflowing. We're also going to take a visit to Misinformation Corner and make some corrections. We're also sharing our own rejection letters. So you're going to get our 3 rejection letter stories. This is something we've done with guests, but have not had a chance to do with each other. And then you'll hear, of course, we'll end with martinis to celebrate and say goodbye to 2024. As usual, my co-host, Todd Vazeri.
Hey, I'm Todd Vazeri, compositing supervisor and artist at Industrial Light and Magic.
And our producer, Jenny.
Hello, Jenny Ely, production manager at ILM.
And I'm Rob Brado, Chief Creative Officer at ILM and SVP of Creative Innovation at Lucasfilm. And we all work together at ILM on visual effects, in animation, and immersive entertainment. With that intro, Jenny, should we just dive right into the mailbag? We got a few to get to.
Yeah. Okay, so first question is from Justin Pimenter from Australia. I've attached a recent BTS screenshot from the set of Skeleton Crew. Can you please identify or name the device attached to the lens that the DP is using to frame up the shot and explain how they work on set and aid the DP?
Love this question. Thank you, Justin, for asking it. And we got John Knoll to give us the answer to this question since he was on set with the team and can describe it perfectly. So here's the answer from John himself.
The person in the photograph is Jake Schreier, our episode 7 director. He's looking through a director's finder, which is a way for a director to have a lightweight way to view through one of our taking lenses. So it's just a viewfinder attached to the lens itself, so they can see how a shot would be framed without having to hold a big, heavy camera.
Thank you, Mr. Knoll. The perfect answer, of course. Also, you can use different kind of director's finders. This one, if you take a look at the picture, which will be attached in the show notes, is a great one because you can actually, as John said, look through the actual glass that they're going to later attach to the camera, and it's as perfect as it can be, and you get every characteristic of the glass affected, or you're seeing it through the actual lens. You can also download an app like this is Cadrage, I don't know how to say it, Cadrage, and it'll work on your iPhone, and you can use that as a finder, and you can load in there, you can pre-configure what lenses, what kit you have, what short and long and wide lenses you have on your show, and actually frame up and take still frames with your iPhone. And that is another really great way that people use to communicate on set where they want to frame up their shots and plan for the shooting day.
It's a really lightweight, easy way to get around. You don't have to move the motion picture camera, which is hooked up to about 85,000 cables, and it's a big deal. No need for dollies, no need for cranes. You could just zip around and quickly visualize or experiment with a camera angle or a lens on the set.
And then you can also do the most primitive thing of all, which is just use your 2 fingers to make a little V and then point where you want the camera to be. And actually, that is surprisingly effective to communicate camera position on set as well.
Yes, I will link the image that Justin sent in of the screenshot from Skeleton Crew in the show notes so you can see what we're talking about. The next question is from Sergio Lugo. I read somewhere that early panels for LED volumes were made out of commercial LED displays for outdoor signs. Is it true? How has the tech evolved since then? And isn't it a downgrade in color range compared to old lights, like decimating your light range?
Such a good question. Thank you, Sergio, for asking. Close. Really, the LED technology was more born out of the industries that were using it for concert tech. Hardened cases that could withstand a production environment, but usually not outdoor LEDs specifically. Outdoor LEDs are great in that they're really bright, but as you're maybe pointing out in your question, they don't always have the actual color accuracy that we're looking for. And before we started shooting on LED volumes, we tested dozens and dozens of different LEDs to see which had the best response to the cinematic cameras that we shoot with. And it was a non-trivial color science job to try to get those LED panels to behave well enough to be able to be directly photographed. And Boy, I could go into tons of detail about the processes that we used and the years-long testing process that it was to take LEDs from being a useful lighting source to being something we could almost photograph on camera to being something we could actually use for the first season of The Mandalorian, with Jon Favreau being excited to dive in and honestly take a big chance on this technology for that. One of the first times I know that we used it pretty extensively, certainly on Star Wars, was on Rogue One. That was John Knoll supervising that show. He was working with Greg Fraser, who is a cinematographer that we've worked with many times and also worked on The Mandalorian. And Greg was very bullish, even though the LED tech was earlier and the accuracy of the colors was not as high as what we have today. What Greg Fraser and John were excited about was that this technology was going to give us the opportunity to control the lighting over a large area light in a very articulate way and make it super dynamic for some of those flying sequences. And the results are incredible in Rogue One, the lighting on the faces. But it wasn't the only light that was used. I think there's a bit of a misconception that you're restricted to just using LEDs, and that's not the case at all. So on Rogue One, Greg was flying, I think, a 10K incandescent light, a normal light bulb that is built on fire that gives you a beautiful color range, and that was the main sunlight. And then the LEDs were giving all the fill, and you get this really dramatic fill that's very dynamic. And they used it in a couple of on-camera shots in Rogue One as well. On Solo, we actually used laser projectors for some of the same reasons you're highlighting here. We had more resolution, more color accuracy, we had better color controls, but we were getting some in-camera finals on Solo. And then by the time Mandalorian came about, the panels were at a resolution, the space between the pixels was finer, and the panels themselves were giving off colors that were much closer to the kind of color range we look for in cinema. And even with our very high dynamic range cameras, you could pick up a lot of subtle detail in them. So yeah, it was really important that the LED technology evolves. Back then on Mando Season 1, we all predicted like a year from now we'd have new panels, and a year after that we'd have new panels, and there are some new panels. There's some great panels out there. But those panels we picked on Rogue One probably power 90% of the LED stages that are in use today around the world. They ended up being a really nice trade-off. They're really bright, they have good color range, they're very durable in a production environment, and it turns out a 2.9 mil panel, meaning 3 millimeters between each pixel, it turns out that resolution, while you can go finer, that ends up being about the sweet spot. If your camera's 15, 20 feet away from the wall, using some depth of field, it ends up working out pretty well. So that's ended up being a very useful panel for us as an industry, I would say, for the last, 7 years or so since we started doing those tests on Mandalorian.
There's two moments of the modern projection system that ultimately became stagecraft that I will never forget as an artist and as a movie fan. One of them was when Rob, you and Pat Tubach turned over the going into hyperspace shot from Solo, where we're looking behind Lando and the droid and the streaky stars happen. All of that was happening in camera. We were doing the L3 CG version of L3, and that's why I was compositing the shot. The camera swings around to see Han in profile, and you're getting the accurate hyperspace tunnel interactive light on his face. And more than that, you can see the tunnel reflected in his eyeball. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, this is breathtaking that this is happening all in camera. The actors can actually see what they're supposed to be reacting to, and we get all of this very authentic, true to life interactive lighting and reflections. It was just stunning, and I'm never ever going to forget that. And I'm like, wow, and then I start thinking like, if we wanted to recreate this in digital, we absolutely could do it, but it wouldn't have nearly the fidelity and instant results that we get in camera using the techniques.
And the best thing about putting the tools all together on set is you would never have thought to storyboard and pre-plan that shot out.
Right.
But Bradford Young was a DP on Solo. He's such an artist. He would feel his way through these shots. And, Phoebe Waller-Bridge throws the hyperspace lever in the front seat. And every other Star Wars movie, I know because at that point I'd researched every hyperspace shot in Star Wars and watched them all and studied them and they're so much fun and they're so inspirational. But 100% of them cut the moment after the lever gets thrown into hyperspace. And the reason for that, I think, is, mostly in the cockpit, there's not a lot of place to go with the camera. So it's really a lot of work to move the camera. And The editor is cutting with a blue screen. So once the lever has been thrown, what are you there for? You cut, and you could give it just a half a beat for the stars to streak, and then you're out. And that's just how it had been done in Star Wars for all the years leading up to Solo. And then we had the hyperspace tube wrapped around this projection screen, and Bradford looks around at the cockpit, and emotionally in the story, this is the first time Han Solo is in the cockpit of the Falcon when he goes into hyperspace. So it's this moment of hope coming out of a pretty dark first act, right?
Yeah.
We're starting the second act. This is pretty cool. Now we're in the ship. And then he noticed the reflection of hyperspace in his eye, and he's that's the shot. And did this nice continuous shot that none of us would have ever thought of without putting those tools on set for everyone to see.
The other one is, I wasn't on Mando season 1, but when some of the first plates, some of the first photography from Stagecraft started coming online, and Charmaine Chan called a bunch of compositors over. She had it loaded on her screen, and she called a bunch of us over, and she's like, "Hey guys, look at this. Isn't this cool?" And she would bring up a shot, and she would ask us, "Okay, now guess where the set ends and Stagecraft begins." And 3 or 4 of us were looking over her shoulder, and we're all just shouting out, "Maybe you're on that tread, or maybe you're around that piece of We were all wrong. None of us could tell where the set ended and the panels began. It was so incredible. And because up until that point, we had seen demos, we talked a lot about it, we'd seen the test, but this was the final pixels coming out of the camera, and it was stunning.
That's so much fun.
Yeah.
We love to play that game of like, where's the LED wall? And I love to stump people with that because it always surprises all of us. The magic tricks you can play is really fun. So just to go back, Todd,
Yeah.
you composited L3 in the shot where we go into hyperspace, one of my favorite shots in the movie. So now we're 2 for 2 for my favorite shots that you composited. Okay, just noted.
Weird how those always come up too. Yeah.
Todd knows how to pick them. We got another question from Samuel.
Yeah. Samuel DeVore asks, has the use of drones and the prevalence of drone video in everyday life changed the way that camera movements are used in visual effects and virtual worlds?
I love this question because to me, this is all about, a new piece of tech, a new style, a new technique that is added to the vocabulary that we call cinema, like the words that we use in cinema. Things like a cut. If you didn't understand what a cut was when you're watching your first motion picture, you'd probably be a little, there would be jarring, and because you're immediately instantly transforming your field of view to a new perspective. We talked about that on a previous episode. Camera movements is another one where, let's say, a slow dolly move. If you had never really experienced what a dolly was, and the perspective is changing in the middle of a shot, that's a new thing. And so every decade that cinema progresses, we add new words to our vocabulary. Now, a cut, moving camera, tracking shot, crane shots, none of that bothers us. None of that, it's all just part of the regular language of how we tell stories using cameras. And drones are absolutely becoming a part of it. We are now becoming way more accustomed to seeing it in a, let's just say, a documentary style, where it's a lot of people are just going out and taking amazing drone photography and putting it on social media. It's being integrated into literal documentaries, and it's now appearing in Hollywood narrative films. I would say that probably recently the most extensive use was in Michael Bay's Ambulance, where it would dramatic chase sequences, car chase sequences, and you would cut to drone shots, which are, they're so dynamic. And we're supposed to just imagine that this is part of the visual language of the movie, and you get absorbed into it, and it just becomes part of the way the movie is made. Now, if you saw those shots maybe 10 or 15 years ago, it would probably be a little bit more jarring, along the lines of the frequent criticism of certain visual effects movies that have the camera of God, the camera move that is impossible, that goes through keyholes and in and out and spirals and does things that a real physical camera cannot do with a helicopter or a crane or a Steadicam and things like that. and those sometimes take you out of the movie. Now we have a new phrase in the vocabulary of cinema, and that's drone photography. Cameras that can zip around and go into places, get in and out of places that previously was impossible with the tech that was available at the time. I think it's super cool, and just any tool used with great care and easing into that transition, I think is important. And in 20 years or 10 years or even 5 years from now, we're not even going to be thinking about it at all. It's not going to be like that new innovative style. It's just going to be integrated into the way we make movies, and leads to opportunities for shots that we couldn't even conceive of previously.
Yeah, my favorite drone shots are the ones that, maybe they start as something else and then evolve into a drone shot, and you're just drawn in, and usually for great storytelling purposes, trying to tell the expanse of the space or the distance the person has to go or something, and you start in close and you come out to an infinite shot and you're like, well, that couldn't have been a chopper because it was within 4 feet of the actor. So I guess it was a drone, but I don't even know how they did that. And when you ask that question afterwards, I think it works amazingly well. Some really fun drone photography that we should link to in the show notes, and maybe everybody's seen it, but there's this brilliant pilot/cinematographer who flew a drone into a bowling alley and just did this amazing tour of the bowling alley. And it's probably not a show that today would belong in a movie because it's the camera move is so flashy. It's drawing attention to the piloting skills of the cinematographer, which is amazing, and you should enjoy it for what it is. It's beautiful. We'll link to it. But it's really interesting to figure out the best storytelling purposes of these new tools for sure. Yeah. Like anything, like stagecraft can be used as a storytelling device seamlessly, or it can draw attention to itself if not used perfectly. So you want to make sure your drone photography is the same, I would say. Jenny, do we have one more question before we jump into Misinformation Corner?
Yes, we have one more question. This is from Shauna. Shauna asks, I'm curious about lens flares in modern movies. Are they captured in camera or added in post? And what makes a good lens flare?
That's interesting. I would love to talk about lens flares. Rob, can we just set aside the whole rest of the show? Because
yeah, that's right.
Here's the deal.
Wait a second. Hold on.
What?
Before we go into what will probably be an entire episode worth of discussion on lens flares, why don't we save all these up? Let's save all of our lens flare questions and topics, and let's make a whole episode out of it. Todd, what do you think?
Okay, only one episode? Okay, I think we can do that.
Let's make it the 20th episode of the season. Let's have a lens flare extravaganza, really? Something for everyone to look forward to.
I think that's a great idea.
And let's be sure that we say what a lens flare is at the top of that episode.
We will definitely tell you what a lens
flare is.
That's what is a lens flare. What makes a good lens flare is going to be the discussion. That'll be fun.
I'm
Great.
excited for that episode.
That takes us to Misinformation Corner. And there was some news in the press this week around the release of Skeleton Crew and some misinformation that got fixed live in real time. Todd, do you want to walk us through the fun that you were following online on the interwebs?
Yeah, sure. Well, everybody probably knows that the new Star Wars series Skeleton Crew is now streaming on Disney+. And I had the good fortune of being a lead artist on that show. It was a wonderful experience.
The show looks beautiful, by the way. I mean, it's super pretty.
It's awesome. We're very proud of the work, and we're very happy that people are enjoying the show. That one of the great characters is Neel, the elephant-like kitty character that is so cute and so wonderful and such an incredible performance. And we were very proud to be a part of the creation of Neel, which was a combination of the physical performer. There was a combination of the animatronic puppet that was on the performer's head, and also digital augmentation and sometimes all CG versions of Neel's head to either enhance the performance or make tiny little tweaks to the performance. It truly was a team effort to bring Neel to life. Imagine my surprise when I was reading an online article that very proudly and boldly proclaimed that Neel was surprisingly not CGI. That was quite a shock to read that. And this is something that happens all the time. When the press gets a nugget of information, but sometimes extrapolates that into making broad conclusions about how a particular effect was done, a particular creature was executed, and jumps to conclusions. And I believe this happened for Neel. And in interviews or seeing B-roll from the on-set photography, It sure looks like it was fully animatronic. It fully was a puppet. And if that's all the information you had, that is a conclusion you can draw from. However, that is not the full story. The full story is that Industrial Light and Magic was intimately involved with the creation of Neel. And Clayton Sandell got to interview ILM VFX supervisor Eddie Pasquarello and animation supervisor Sean Kelly, and got the full skinny on how Neel was created. And that's going to be online at ilm.com if it isn't already at the time this episode comes out. So there's going to be more on that soon. But since I'm on social media, I saw the headline and I asked politely, here's Clayton Sandell's reporting on how Neel was created. Could you please maybe consider changing the headline or issue a correction within the body of the story? And they did. And that's really great. And the headline actually got a lot better. The new headline is One Star Wars Skeleton Crew character is a stunning blend of incredible visual effects. Very accurate headline. I couldn't have written it better myself.
I mean, the combination of techniques here is exactly what we all want to celebrate. And actually, the new headline did. Robert Timothy Smith's performance as Neel is amazing. And the character is so charming. In fact, because you believe him so much. And the combination of his performance inside that puppeted character, which is really articulate and can do some amazing things, is fantastic. And then there's certain limitations of what you can do on set live and what can be done with CG afterwards. And the fact that it's such a seamless hybrid, you don't know which is which when you're watching the show, is exactly the goal.
And in the piece, they added an additional line. Neel was created using a stunning, seamless combination of practical and digital effects. And I bring this up because, you know, we see a lot of misinformation about that out there about how Hollywood movies are created, particularly about anything related to digital effects. What's really interesting is the shot that Clayton Sandell was reporting on and indicated that Neel's head was completely digital. It is one of my shots that I composited. So it hit real home, and I'm glad that the site will link to my article in the show notes where I documented the whole thing. I'm really glad that they were able to make that change, because that doesn't happen hardly ever. So
yeah,
thank
it's
you.
Super nice. It's really cool to see that from SlashFilm, that they wanted to do that. We'll link to their article and Todd's highlighting of this correction in the show notes, so you can read that if you're interested. But it's always nice when the reporting gets the whole story, so it's very cool when that happens. Okay, that takes us to our main topic for today, which is we're going to actually tell you our rejection letter stories, our stories of us getting started. And why don't we kick off, Jenny, with you? Because you said you've got a rejection letter story that could apply today, so we're very interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually made a career shift in about my mid-30s. Just a little bit of background about me. So like a lot of people in this industry, and ILM specifically, when I was a kid, my favorite movies were, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters, E.T., Willow, Jurassic Park, all the things that ILM and Lucasfilm have done. I didn't actually really realize at that time that there were all these jobs working in movies other than just being an actor. So in college, I chose theater as a major because at my school, which was East Tennessee State University, that was about as close as I could get at that time to the immersion and magic of film and entertainment. So I actually worked in professional theater for about 10 years after college. And then I decided that I wanted to make a career change and take a shot at maybe working for my dream company.
Wait, sorry to interrupt, but what did you do in professional theater?
I was a scenic artist.
Very cool.
So I was a painter. I painted like backdrops and props and things like that.
Scenics.
Yeah. I worked as a production assistant, like a stagehand for a little while too, but mostly as a scenic artist.
Oh, that's great.
On the East Coast. Yeah. And that was great. I loved it. But, it's working for nonprofit theaters and long, hard labor was, I was like, I don't really want to do this forever. And I'm not by nature a talented artist. I just had really great teachers and kind of got the hang of it. So I wanted to do something I was a little more passionate about. And of course, Lucasfilm, ILM were at the very top of my list. I moved to California when I was 36 and I started applying for jobs. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew where I wanted to do it. So I had some experience in office management and project management because when you work in theater, you never have just one job because you can't live. So I always had a couple of side jobs and things. But on paper, I wasn't qualified to do anything in the entertainment industry. And I was applying for everything that looked like something I could even remotely handle. And I wasn't just applying at Lucasfilm or ILM. It was every film studio, game studio, theme park job, literally in California. And it was just radio silence. You know, it's like tough getting an automated rejection letter like 5 minutes after you submit an application. But the majority, I just never heard anything from. So this went on for like a year and a half. I was living here for, like I said, it was like a year and a half. And I still have my email folder with at least 100 jobs that I had applied for. Some rejections, some just nothing. But I was starting to get super desperate. I was obsessing over my resume, rewriting it after every rejection, changing wording, moving things around. And I just kept thinking, I don't look right on paper. I knew if I could just get an interview that I could sell myself, but I had no experience in this industry. And I was just getting run over by thousands of people who were like 10 years younger than me, graduating from film school and coming off internships with production companies. And so I was pretty close to giving up and just thinking, okay, I've just got to shift my focus. So in sort of a last ditch effort, I thought, okay, I'm going to scrap my entire resume and start over. I cut it down to just one page. I made it very simple and I wrote it as me rather than, what I thought a hiring manager might be looking for. And I put a lot more of my actual personality into the cover letter because, like I said, I thought I can sell myself if somebody will just talk to me. I'll explain to them that I will, I'll learn how to do this and I'll make it work. But, on paper, these people are getting tons of resumes all the time and they just have to go with what they see. So I saw a job pop up for an executive assistant at Skywalker Sound. And I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to apply for this. If it doesn't work, I'm going to shift focus and move on. So I sent in my new resume and cover letter and I got contacted by a recruiter literally 1 hour later. And let me tell you, after what I had been through, seeing a Lucasfilm recruiter email in my inbox is a feeling I will not forget. And so I talked to Laura Holliday, who's one of our incredible recruiters at Lucasfilm. And I went through several screening interviews with recruiting, phone interviews with some of the people at Skywalker Sound. And I kept getting through each round. And then I finally made it to the last round, which was the in-person interview. And I was going to go to Skywalker Ranch, meet some people there. And I was like, okay, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. We were down to 2 or 3 candidates. And I was like, okay, I can get in the room. I can sell myself. I know everything about Star Wars. I'm outgoing. I can pretend to be professional. I'm going to nail this. So it went really well. I went there. I interviewed with a few people. I didn't have any major mess ups, felt great about it. So a little bit later that afternoon, I emailed Laura, the recruiter, with a thank you note, which, by the way, you should always send a thank you note.
Always do a thank you note.
Always. Even if you don't think it went well or you don't want the job, always send a thank you note. I sent my letter to the recruiter and said, would you mind sending these to the people I talked to earlier today? So she called me and she said they decided to go with somebody else. And I legit felt like the world dropped out from under me. I thought, that's it. I just blew the only shot I'm ever going to get at working for this company. And the fact that they decided so quickly was a little bit of an ego blow. Of course, I was doing all kinds of speculation about why they didn't go with me, which is not a good idea because you never know what's going on, So anyway, but Laura was so gracious. I mean, she is just the best recruiter. She seemed to genuinely empathize. She could tell that I was upset, but, she said, we'll keep your resume on file. She said she would keep an eye out for anything that looked like a good fit. And I was like, great, thank you, and goodbye forever. I was like, I'm never going to hear from people. So I was just heartbroken. I got in the room and I couldn't do it. Couldn't sell myself. I blew my shot. And I thought they're going to pass my resume around and they're going to be like, don't ever hire this person. She interviewed terribly. No. I stopped applying in the entertainment industry. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I focused on applying for other jobs. I got a job at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, working at the School of Architecture, which was cool, but it's not really what I wanted to do. And I kept in touch with Laura over that year. Just every once in a while, I'd say, hey, anything, looking promising. And, she was always like, yeah, I'm just keeping you in mind, but nothing really. And my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, was very encouraging to keep going and keep trying. He was like, this industry is hard, but it just takes the right fit and the right person. So about a year after the Skywalker Sound interview, I decided to look at the career website, and there was an executive assistant role posted for ILM X Lab, which is now ILM Immersive. And at the time, it was a fairly new kind of scrappy team. They work in VR and AR, and it was in the Lucasfilm ILM family, and it sounded really cool. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I applied and emailed Laura, told her I applied, submitted my application, And she called me a couple of hours later and said she thought I could actually be a good fit for this role. So I went through the interview process again. I did phone screenings, phone interviews, and I got to the in-person interview stage again. So here I am walking into Lucasfilm doing in-person interviews. I talked to Julie Pang, who's the director of production for ILM Immersive, and Vicky Dobbs-Beck, who I would be supporting if I got the EA role. And Vicky is the VP of Immersive Content Innovation. And I just loved both of them. And I felt like it went really well, but I didn't want to get my hopes up because obviously I didn't want to go through that pain again. I spoke to Laura afterwards. She told me that the team had a few things going on, so it would be like a week or two before I heard. So I kind of just put it out of my mind, went on about my life. And then Laura called me a couple of weeks later and said that they really liked me and they were considering me or one other person, and that she would hope to have an answer for me that evening. So needless to say, I didn't get anything done at work that day because I was just a nervous wreck. So she called me about 6:15 that night and told me that they wanted to offer me the job. It was just the best feeling ever. After going through almost 2 years of just rejection after rejection, and I can remember exactly where I was sitting when she called. I remember what I was wearing. I'll never forget that moment. I was 38 years old at that point, and I felt like my life was just starting. So I got in, and I just swore to myself that I would never take any of it for granted. I wouldn't let anyone down. I'd prove that I deserved to be here, and I worked as hard as possible, learned everything I could, volunteered for every extra project. And Vicky is just an incredible person to know and work for. And both she and Julie taught me so much and let me grow. And eventually they promoted me to a project manager role, then an operations role. And then about 2 years ago, I moved over to ILM into Rob's office. And now I am right in the middle of VFX for film and television and all the other incredible things we do. And here I am doing everything I ever wanted to do for the holy grail of my childhood. So that is my long saga, and it was absolutely worth it. So,
Oh, that's great.
That's a great story. I'm getting those. You're triggering some of the rejection letters that I've gotten over the years.
Yeah.
Telling that story. You did it really well.
Yeah. 2 years is a long time.
It was a long time.
Well, it's very different in terms of where you were in life and how long 2 years is in that phase of life, especially after changing careers and feeling that's tricky. I really wanted to work in computers and computer graphics, and I had no idea how. I lived in Orange County, which is near LA. It's in Southern California. So I was really near the epicenter where a lot of this was happening, but I had no connections to the industry. The closest thing I knew was a reasonably, like a half an hour bike ride from my house away was a computer store called Century Computers that sold Amigas. And, Amiga computers were home computers with pretty good graphics and sound cards in them. And we had bought a computer there. And as my dad was buying our Amiga 1000, which, by the way, we expanded to have 1.5 megabytes of memory. It came with 256K. So 1.5 megs of memory was the expansion card, and it took up the entire giant device. Yeah, so when we were buying our computer, I'm like, this is where I want to work. And I think I was 12 or 13 at the time. I was too young to get a job at Century Computers. But my parents were like, well, go there. I would go there and look for software and exchange shareware disks. You would have these freeware and shareware disks that you could do copies of. So I'd buy blank disks and copy software on them and take them home and use them and try to learn how to use Deluxe Paint and make my own graphics. And I started my own little business at home called Online Video, which, by the way, I should have registered that. If there was such a thing as domain names, Online Video would have been an okay domain name. I still have my very first invoice where I did a flying graphics logo for a laser cutting company. I bumped into this guy who worked did corporate videos for people on VHS, and I burned out this like M&T laser company logo, and it was like this fake laser burned in from the side. Sparks went flying everywhere, which all had to be hand drawn. And then the letters M&T like fell away, or the backing fell away, leaving their logo on. Just decent
cool.
logo. I invoiced them for that. It was a big time first contract, $6. I have that. I have that invoice. Yeah, $6. It was about 25, 30 hours of work probably for me. As a 13-year-old. But so I was, getting underway. I was editing people's weddings. I was shooting anything I could shoot. I was just making as much stuff as I could. But I wanted to work at this computer store. And I think I went by probably 10 times between age 13 and 16 applying for work. And they were like, basically, they didn't want to say, you're too young, kid. But that was really the story. Like, could you imagine, like, if a 14-year-old salesperson comes up to you in a computer store, do you need any help? I was too young. So when I did need a job to pay for my car, I applied all over the place. I'm like, I'm not going to get a normal job. Of course, I applied at Knott's Berry Farm, which was down the street from my house, half an hour ride. I couldn't afford a car yet, so I was taking the bus to Knott's Berry Farm. I was selling churros, come home smelling like a giant churro in that.
Oh my God, this is the best story ever.
With a cowboy hat, I would hide the cowboy hat because on Beach Boulevard in the bus, you don't really want to be wearing the cowboy hat looking. You're already wearing faux Western clothes. It's a bad look. And I was a seasonal hire at Knott's Berry Farm. And in my first summer, I'd been there 2 or 3 months, and Century Computer calls. And the woman who co-owned the place called me and said, Rob, are you still interested in coming to work for us at Century Computers? We actually could use some help. We need tech help in the back, a little sales help up front. You'd be building machines and doing tech support. And I'm like, yes, 100% I'm in. I think I was going to make $5.30 an hour, which was great with me. I was thrilled. So I drafted my resignation letter to Knott's Berry Farm that night. I remember my mom saying, Rob, you have a pretty stable job at Knott's. Are you sure you want to give that up to go work at this little tiny computer store that had like 6 employees? You never know what's going to happen. And I'm like, I'm a seasonal employee at Knott's Berry Farm. Yes, I want to quit. Wanted to work there forever. And so I turned in my resignation letter at Knott's Berry Farm. It's kind of funny. The lead I turned it into, she like reads it and she's like, this is a resignation letter. At Knott's, as a seasonal employee, they had probably never received a resignation letter.
People just don't go back to work when
they just don't
quit.
They just don't show up. They don't even call.
The chances of someone not showing up on any given day were non-trivial. And they were like, we were going to make you a lead. And I'm like, oh, thank you so much, but I'm going to go work at this computer store. And it turned out I worked at Century for more than a year and a half. I met some friends there. There was a guy who did computer graphics there on the Emmys, this guy named Doug, who I did reverse etching of signatures for the write-on of the Emmys. I think maybe we've talked about it before, where I did all the work. It ended up getting cut from the show. But I met like the first people in my life who were doing computer graphics full time. And then one day I was working the floor, which is it's about the size, just bigger than the size of this office. It wasn't a big place. And this guy comes in to buy an Amiga. He wants a nice brand new Amiga 3000, pretty souped up. And I'm like, oh, what are you using it for? Oh, we do computer graphics. I need a thing to do some painting on because we're going to be sending these textures that are painted on here over to our Wavefront machines. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'd been watching the Wavefront demo reel. These were, at the time, they were using SGI IRIXs, which were $200,000 computers running $100,000 software. And, by today's standard, very primitive, but it had GPUs in them. They were really sophisticated machines and very expensive. You couldn't get time on a machine like that any other way other than maybe at some colleges, and it was hard to get access. So I'm like, I need to do an internship for my school. Is there any chance I could work for you for free? And David Rose was like, yeah, let's talk. So we set up a time. He ended up hiring me as an intern. Well, hiring is really not the wrong term. He allowed me to come in and work nights and weekends for free to learn the craft of 3D computer graphics at a professional level. I've set up his Amiga for him, got that all working, and then I got time on the Wavefront machines. Got to sit next to people, Wayman Chinsey and Ed and others who had graduated from Cal Arts and learn from them. I ended up staying there all the way through college, and that was my first job for the first 15 years. That's where we did Independence Day and Godzilla. So big movies that we ended up growing into, all the way from cable television spots in Orange County to some movies there over 12 or 15 years. So it was quite a fun journey. And in part because of a couple years of standing by, getting told no at Century Computers, but hanging on because I had a passion for it. It was what I really wanted to be involved in doing.
Please tell me there's a picture of you in this hat.
Oh, I'm sure it can be dug up. This is, I'm afraid to say, it's pre-digital era, so I have to dig back into the albums.
I think a Polaroid would be
wearing the hat, holding a resignation letter.
Yes.
That would be the best.
Rob, when you get busy and stressed out, are you ever like, God, I just wish I was selling churros?
At the time when I was at Knott's Berry Farm, the highest I could see, some people ask me, what do you want to do for a living now? Like, what do you want to do next? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky to be doing what I'm doing. I'm working with the best people in the world on the best projects. When I was at Knott's Berry Farm, I aspired to be on the video team, which was the in-house team that would go and make the videos that would play at company meetings where they would have 1,000 employees all get together and they would tell you about the new churros that were coming out and they would, all this stuff. And I was like, and the videos were pretty good. And they would Camp Snoopy was going and they would do these commercials that they would do sometimes in-house. And I'm like, they would be watching, I would be selling hot dogs and they'd be walking down. I'm like, that's the team I want to be on. That's what I want to be when I grow up.
Oh my God.
And,
I love it.
I'm very lucky.
Someday.
I feel like I don't know, it must be the cowboy hat image. I just feel like you had standoffs with the churro slingers at Disney World. It was like, who's the better churro team?
It is, I think, Jenny, what you were saying in terms of applying yourself and giving 100%. Like the fact that I showed up every day early before my shift and basically it didn't steal from the tills and I was like really dedicated to doing the best job I could. And then I was there a few weeks and they're like, you should start doing the breaking job, which is like giving each person their break and do the different stations because you basically knew how to, you were putting in 100% even though, people weren't that thrilled with the $4.35 minimum wage and they might not have been loving that job, but I was like, you're paying me to be here. Yeah. I want to give you your money's worth. And that sort of dedicated aspect that you can show in any job, it can be can at least make it good terms when you turn in your resignation letter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Todd.
These are great. Oh my God, these are so amazing stories. When I was in college, so we're going into the mid 90s, back when where there was barely a thing called digital effects, I knew I just wanted to work in movies. I didn't know I wanted to work in digital effects. I'm not really a computer guy, even though I work with computers every day of my life, and I use them to create my art. I knew I wanted to work in movies, and the fact that digital technology, digital animation was just taking off at that time was fortuitous for me. And in college, basically my last year, that's when we did get a seat of Wavefront.
Oh, wow.
And an SDI, and we came with the software, the big computer and a monitor and a manual. And the class was, we're going to go through the manual and we're going to try to make projects in it, which was amazing. I also dabbled in Macromedia director, became Macromedia director, Photoshop. I started doing editing in Adobe Premiere. And I realized that I really like digital effects. I really want to do something with digital effects. But in Chicago, at Northwestern University, I have no idea how I'm going to get into the business. And it just so happens that my girlfriend at the time had a family friend who was a TV director. And we were talking about, the future, how we were lucky to spend an afternoon with them. And he had the idea, it'd be a good thing if you don't have any connections and you want to get into the movie business and you want to just do something. The Directors Guild training program. You should try to do that. The end of the credits, the DGA trainee. Yeah. So there's a pretty rigorous application process to become a DGA trainee. At that time, there were 4 big rounds. And I was like, okay, when I graduate, I'm going to apply. And it happened to coincide with my graduation time. That would be really sweet to go right from college into the Directors Guild training program. And first off is the application. And fired that off, and thinking that it's never going to work, they liked the application. They said, that's great. You move on to round 2, which are in-person testing. And there's 2 locations. One is in Los Angeles, and the other is in Evanston, Illinois, at the campus of Northwestern University. I was attending Northwestern University.
How is this possible?
I was like, okay, this is totally set in the stars. This is going to happen. What are the odds? So while other people around the Midwest and the South and the Northeast are flying into Chicago to do the in-person testing, it was a written test or something like that, I waltzed over from my dorm or my apartment and walked right in. And I'm like, hey, you trouble getting in from O'Hare or anything like that? Everybody else was very tired from their journey. I was not. Took the test. I felt pretty good about it. And I passed that round. I was like, oh, this is great. Only 2 more rounds. This is fantastic. We're getting close to graduation. The last 2 rounds are in-person group interviews. And then the final round would be an in-person one-on-one interview. And that would only happen in Los Angeles. And it just so happened to coincide with my graduation day. So I had to make a choice. Do I attend my own graduation or do I try to become a DGA trainee? And I decided to go for it. I got a plane ticket and flew out to LA, got the cheapest motel I could find that was near the Directors Guild, rented the cheapest car I could get, and went to the group interviews with somebody from the DGA. And I felt like it went really well. I was very nervous. And they said they would call you that night and tell you if you move on to the next round. So I go back to my motel, and the phone rings at the motel. And it was the Directors Guild telling me that I did not get to go to the next round, which was going to happen the next day. And I was very sad. And I was just sitting there on the edge of the bed knowing that that was the day of graduation that I had.
Literally all your friends are having a party back at graduation, and you're in a motel in LA.
And the TV was on. And it was a police chase because it's Los Angeles. Of course, it's a live police chase.
Yeah, that's primetime entertainment in LA, I tell you.
When I eventually left and I had to stay a whole extra day because I kind of planned on the extra day of interviewing, but I had nothing to do. As I was about to leave the motel to return the car and get to my flight, I dinged the car because I was just I was so frazzled. My nerves were on edge. Not so great. Not a really great time. I felt really bad about myself. At the exact same time, I was also applying to digital effects companies in the Los Angeles area. I applied to all of them using my, very crummy reel from that animation course, my macro media director stuff, my Photoshop work. It was a crummy demo reel.
Do you remember the best shot on the reel, Todd?
It was, I did model and animate a telescope that was in a dumpster that had a memory of the beautiful stars that it used to see, but now it's been thrown into the dumpster. And it's
That's
just
nice.
It was a pretty good idea. It looked very cheeseball. Total cheeseball. It was student work.
I remember a reel of mine that I don't know if I ever gave it to anybody, but there was a demo, Revolver or something model that was included in one of the applications that I was using, like DirectRaw or something like that. And I remember just positioning that, lighting it, and then animating the revolver, pretending I did shot. So basically I did almost nothing. And I put it in my reel, and it was on my reel towards the end. I'm like, is that okay to put in there? I did do something, but they're going to think I modeled it too, because it was really a modeling demo. And I wasn't at a point where I could say where I realized you could say I did everything but the modeling. It was I don't think, I basically rendered out somebody else's demo. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
Well,
we should do more on demo reels.
I applied to every visual effects company I could find, and I was rejected, rightfully, by every single one. And I probably still have a few of those literal letters because it was, again, talking about the late 90s. Let's see, Metrolight Studios, Digital Domain, Cinesite, PDI, you name it. They all rejected me, again, rightfully. And then it took me a couple more years to get a really good demo reel. I was working at a kids video game company where I used Director again, a lot of After Effects, a lot of Premiere. And then by the time I had a pretty good reel, Vandling at Band from the Ranch gave me my first big break. And will always forever be grateful for that. It's like we talked about on the Dean Cundy episode, be the Roger Corman, give people a chance. Van gave me that chance. And, the rest happened.
When we talk about rejection letters, there's always the person in the rejection letter that gave you the chance and believed in you, even if you didn't really have, exactly what they were looking for. I think that is a key takeaway from rejection letters too, is that once, we all get to the point where we've kind of gotten through and risen up a little bit, you want to be that person for somebody else. So if you're a recruiter or a hiring manager and you can, make that happen for somebody else, that's really special.
Definitely. Yeah, or Vicky Dobbs-Beck, who's been a mentor to all of us here.
Yes.
It's really, there's people that are special about pouring into other people. And certainly, that's a nice thing to celebrate.
Yeah.
That takes us to our martinis, our last chance to do a virtual toast in 2024. And we get 3 more favorite things. I'll call out something that saved my butt this week. It sounds very boring. You should totally buy one. A 12-volt DC portable air compressor pump. So why, do you ask, would you want a 12-volt portable air compressor pump. And it's a little thing. We'll link to it in the show notes. It's this little tiny air compressor that you can use to put air in your tires. And because it's 12 volt, it just plugs into your cigarette lighter. So I was at a show this week with my daughter. We had a really fun time at this concert. And we get out of the parking lot, and my tire is almost completely flat. And I'm trying, like, how am I going to call a tow truck? Am I going to try to find a gas station that's open at near midnight in a part of town I don't know? And then I remembered when I first bought my car, I bought this 12-volt DC portable air compressor pump. It was sitting in the trunk, and I'm like, I've never used this thing. So I get it out. I'm like, oh, I wonder if this thing even works. And it turns out the one that I got for $30 off Amazon here in the US has a digital readout for its PSI. You screw the little thing into the valve on the tire. You screw it into the tire, you're going to have another problem. But screwed into the valve, it actually grabs on there really nicely. You put the other end into the 12 volt. It gives you a readout of what the air pressure was, which mine was like 18 PSI. It's supposed to be 42. You can even on this one, I mean, this is a $30 pump. I've used good air compressors before, but this little tiny thing, you tell it what you want the PSI to be set to on the little digital readout. And then you turn it on, and it starts, it goes, and it starts pumping up your tire very slowly. It's a tiny little compressor, so it takes a while. It's 10 seconds for every half a PSI. But then when it gets to the right amount, it turns off, and you unplug it, and you have air in your tire. And to be able to do that, like self-sufficiently in the parking lot before you drive home, in my case, it was like an hour and a half drive home, made me feel like I was the smartest person in the world for having invested that $30 years before. And it's super easy to use. I highly recommend. This brand was EP Auto that I had, but my guess is there's a lot of brands that are going to be called the same thing that are roughly the same package. And I did some research. There's $50 and $80 ones. Maybe they're twice as good, but mine put air in my tire. I needed it to do it once. That may be all I ever need, but if you need something like that, I recommend it.
Nice.
Jenny.
Yeah, so my overall martini of 2024 is the Lighter Darker podcast.
We got a plug on our own show.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, it's just been so fun. I mean, obviously you just heard my sob story about how, all I wanted to do was to work in the films that I loved. And just getting to do this podcast and sitting down to talk with people who worked on Ghostbusters and, Jurassic Park and Halloween. And Rob is randomly just like, I worked on Independence Day. I'm like, what? All these people I get to interact with and meet that worked on all these, iconic films. It's been incredible. I mean, it's been fun learning how to do a podcast, and it's been amazing seeing the feedback from people who have listened and loved it. And, working with the two of you and our editors, Chris Hawkinson and Greg Grusby from our PR team. It's just been so much fun and, challenging, but, it's one of those things that I don't take for granted that I get to do this. And so that's been my highlight of 2024.
Ah, super nice. And, you hear in the credits, Jenny's a producer on this show, but you know what that actually means? She just has to do all the work.
Does it all.
Yeah.
Everything.
So like the fact that we're here recording this session and the fact that you're going to hear it there's a lot of people involved. Chris helps edit it, which is amazing, and he helps with the tone. There's a lot of other people involved too. But when it comes to are we going to have an episode on the air or not, and what is our schedule and how we're going to get it happen, Jenny's doing all that work, and for the first time. So thank you for taking this on. I'm really glad to hear that's been a highlight for your 2024.
Yeah, it's been worth it for sure.
Yeah, we are very grateful for Jenny. And
yes.
at Lucasfilm ILM, lots of people do a lot of different things, but we're one of the only people that can say, yeah, we do a podcast.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. My martini, looking back at 2024, is something that was quite literally otherworldly, was the eclipse that happened. And I was lucky enough to be able to travel to Austin, Texas. So that's where we had the full eclipse, where the whole entire sun was blotted out by the moon. And it really is a once in a lifetime. It's a moment that you'll never forget because it's a truly otherworldly experience. It's extremely spiritual. The people that we just witnessed it all out in the middle of a field in Austin, Texas. And it was maybe 20, 30 of us, some of whom didn't know each other at all.
Wow.
And there's stages to the eclipse. And when it finally goes dark, I'm getting choked up just thinking about it. Everything gets eerily silent, and then everybody wants to cheer, and there are tears. There's something inside of your body saying this shouldn't happen, and yet this is something incredibly special, and it's not going to last for very long. And sure enough, after just a few minutes, the sun starts coming out again over the moon. And it was a once in a lifetime experience, probably for me. And I'll never, ever forget it. I'm so glad that I got to experience it with my family in a really good spot. And yeah, it was absolutely stunning.
Oh, that's really fun. What fun highlights. And thank you all for listening to the Lighter Darker podcast this year. Man, to have a 2024 where we got to get 10 episodes to you has been really fun. So we really appreciate the support, your questions, the reviews you've left. On our first episode of 2025 will be a good one. It's with Amy Beth Christensen. She's one of the designers in our art department. It's an episode titled Shaping Characters for Tomorrow, and it's out on January 14th. And we have some other really fun episodes all lined up for 2025. And if you want to reach us, email us at lighterdarker@ilm.com. Our social media links will be linked to in the show notes. Thank you for leaving the reviews. If you haven't already, maybe drop a review into Apple Podcasts. That can be your New Year's resolution. And we want to thank Industrial Light and Magic, who has generously hosted the Lighter Darker podcast. This show is produced by Jenny Ely and myself, Rob Brado. And in the art department, you've seen some artwork from Chelsea Castro and Hannah Puente, who have done a great job promoting the show. And they work with the rest of the team, including our editor, Chris Hawkinson, and our PR team, Greg Gresby. They all have been working behind the scenes to make sure the show happens and we get the word out so people find it. So thank you all for your help. Happy New Year, and thank you for listening to the Lighter Darker podcast. And until next time, may your pixels be both lighter and darker.